Hey, good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here with you again. As Doug mentioned in the opening, I was here back in March for a couple of Sundays, and I was really excited when Beth called a couple weeks ago and said, could you come in June? I was like, yes, please. I would love to come back and be with you all, because that's such a great time. So if we didn't meet in March, my name's Matthew. I live in Atlanta. I have 4 kids, the oldest of which graduated high school this past week, which has been amazing. And also makes you feel so incredibly old at the same time. Anyway, I was a pastor for 17 years, and now I work with leaders across the country, and I get to do this on the side, and just what a gift it is to be here this morning, especially as we're starting this new study together, this new series on leadership. And leadership is one of those things that as soon as I said that word, probably half of you were like, well, this isn't about me, and you're wrong. And I'm gonna try to convince you of that in the next couple of minutes. But I think we can all agree that we're living at this time, and this has probably always been the case, but maybe it's just, we just can see it everywhere because everyone has a camera phone. But we're living in a vacuum of leadership. There's an absence today, whether it's geopolitical or in the church or in our communities or in our corporations, of just good, grounded leaders, people who are helping us navigate very uncertain, tumultuous times. And a lot of times when we hear things about leadership, or you hear oh, there's this podcast about leadership or a book about leadership, you're thinking I'm just living in the leader's world. That's my role in this. And I can't do anything about what's going on out there, and it's a mess. And truly it is. I mean, if you pulled your phone out right now, in 10 seconds, you could find half a dozen articles about failed leaders, canceled influencers, toxic coaches, criminal corporate leaders, abusive spiritual leaders. It's everywhere, right? Which can have the effect of making us, when we even think about leadership, it can kind of make us cynical. And I think cynicism is a very understandable feeling in today's world. I think a lot of us feel cynical because we've just looked around and seen the way everything is. And so we naturally sort of build up a sort of a hardness towards this idea of could there be good leaders? Could I be a good leader? And yet that, if only, it just seems to magnify how much more important it is for us today in the church to be talking about what does it mean for us to be the kinds of leaders that God calls us to be, the kinds of leaders that the world so desperately needs. We also, I think a lot of us, when we talk about leadership, we immediately think, maybe we don't think it's happening outside the room, but we think this is a message for other people in the room than me. And so there's some people in the room who, you might be naturally extroverted, or you just know oh, this person was always the lead in the group school project, or now they're the one rallying the neighborhood together to get food to the family with the new baby, or with the mom who's going through chemo, or this person's in charge of your running group and always setting the routes, or this person is always making the decisions for your family about what vacation you're going to take. And so we think oh, those are the leaders. These are the people that we need to be talking about. But leadership is not limited to just the extroverted and the outward, sort of. Leadership is something every single one of us can do, because leadership at its core, at its essence, is influence. Leadership is having influence on another person. And every one of you, if you're breathing, and I hope you are, every one of us has influence. If you are a parent, if you are in a community, if you live with roommates, if you post on social media, you have influence in the world, which means you have the capacity to be a leader, like the ones that God is calling us to be. One way to think about it is this: your life leaves behind it a wake. So if you think about a boat or a jet ski or something, there's something left behind. So every time you guys, you get off a call, you leave the Zoom room, you walk out of a party, you end your community group time, whatever it is, you leave behind you something's left after you. In fact, we all can picture this. Probably many of you have someone you could put in your mind who's they're in the conversation, and then when they leave, there's just this sense of relief, whew, okay, thank goodness, Or the opposite can be true, where someone leaves and afterwards there's just this general shared afterglow, where everyone just kind of looks at each other and it's man, aren't they the best person? And the thing is that is what you already do. You already have that impact. There is something that lingers in the air after you are gone, and that's your wake, that's your influence, and that is, friends, your leadership opportunity in whatever sphere you're in. So today we're going to begin this series about leadership, and we're going to do it the way that Prairie Heights has sort of done this for the last couple summers. So you may know this. It's sort of a summer tradition for us at Prairie Heights to take 1 month and just be in one book of the Bible. And this year, we're going to do the book of Titus, which is this tiny little letter. Like if you were just flipping through the New Testament, you would totally miss it because it's like 3 chapters, this tiny little letter. And yet we're going to spend the next 5 weeks in it because it has a ton to say to us about leadership and about the context in which we're living in. Because it's a letter that was written by the Apostle Paul, who was, you probably know, you may not know, he was like sort of the first great Christian missionary. He took the message of Jesus from Jerusalem and he took it all the way across the Roman world. And along the way, he had all these people he was working with, these students of his, disciples. And one of these disciples was a guy named Titus. And he sends Titus to this island called Crete. Does anyone know where Crete is? It's far away. It's always a safe answer. It is far away. It's off the coast of Greece. Crete is a pretty large island off the coast of Greece. And the church in Crete was a mess. And the reason it was a mess is because of its leadership. And the reason why its leadership was such a mess is because of the kinds of people who tended to make Crete their home. Crete was a place where many retired mercenaries would end their careers. And so after killing thousands of people for money, you'd find a nice beach house on Crete and you'd grow old there and eat grapes and do whatever you do in Crete. And so these were the people who were sort of, now Paul was trying to build a church with. On top of that, in Crete, it was sort of the main religious culture of Crete was the veneration of the god Zeus. Probably many of you, if not all of you, have heard of Zeus. And one of the things that is pretty common in all ancient mythologies, so Norse, Roman, Greek, whatever, is that the gods were creeps. They did terrible things to people. They exploited people. They preyed on the vulnerable. They took what they wanted. They slept with who they wanted. They were not, and if that is who you venerate in a society, if that's your God, well, that's going to have an effect on the culture of the place. In fact, there's this very famous saying about the people of Crete. It was said by a Cretan poet 500 years before the time of Paul. But Paul quotes it in the beginning of his letter. It's the funniest verse in the Bible. Are you ready? So this is from the beginning of Titus 1. This is chapter 12, and he's quoting this Cretan poet Epimedes. He says, "Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons." And then he says in the next sentence, and this is true, which I think is the funniest thing ever. This is the Bible. So the Bible says Cretans are the worst of the worst. Paul is basically saying, I know I've sent you to a place which is nearly impossible to find good people. I picture Crete, and I picture, anyone seen the movie Tangled? You know, when Flynn Rider takes Rapunzel to the Snuggly Duckling, that little pub with all the pirates in it. That's what I think. If you haven't seen it, you should see it today. It's a great movie. It came out 15 years ago. But it's this place full of rascals, the worst of the worst. And in this place, Paul has sent Timothy to try to find good people to lead these churches. That's what this letter is about. So today, what we're going to talk about on this first Sunday of this series on leadership is what I think is probably the foundation or the core, but also at the same time, the most often neglected part of what makes someone a good leader. And that is character. Character is what determines whether or not a person actually has what they need inside to be the kind of leader that the church needs, that your community needs, that your family needs, the world needs. A pastor from my hometown, Andy Stanley, says, he defines character this way. He says, character is the will to do what is right as defined by God, regardless of the personal cost. So character is the invisible part of us that no one can see until they can see it. That's what happens sometimes. Character leaks out, it gets exposed. And it is the part inside of us, good character, is the will, So it's a choice to do what is right, as defined by God, regardless of the costs. The shocking headlines in our world today predominantly come from when you have a celebrated, lauded, maybe even beloved person fall from grace, is how we would say it. Right now we're watching this sort of just awful, scandalous trial of P. Diddy, who wasn't like the Mr. Rogers of our times, but we're all kind of like, at one point we're like, this guy's pretty great, and now no one's saying that. Or if you just go back a few years, sort of the torrent of headlines, during the Me Too movement, when people like Matt Lauer and Kevin Spacey and all these people they're being exposed as like, oh no, they were preying on people, and like that is because what was true about their character finally became known to the rest of us. So character is the most important thing that you and I can work on, think about, focus on when we are thinking about how do I become the kind of leader that the world needs. And the thing is that bad character often will go unnoticed if the person has charisma. Charisma is the great mask of an absence of character. We live in a charisma-driven world. We reward confidence, communication skills, popularity, and presence. We follow people who can perform, but charisma by itself is shallow. It can take you so far. You might even say it can take you almost all the way. But character is what sustains you in your leadership. Charisma can inspire, but character sustains. So Paul, in his letter to this young pastor, Titus, in this really hard place, is letting them know from the beginning, it's the character of these people that we're looking for. We're not looking for, can they speak good? We're looking for people that have something that's true about their insides. And the way he begins this whole conversation is in the second verse of the letter. He says these words, "In the hope of eternal life, which God, who does not lie, promised before the beginning of time," and then he goes on. And that's a really important little "who does not lie," mostly because it doesn't show up anywhere else in his letters. So he is saying, I'm telling you, as we go forward in this conversation about character, you can base this idea that character matters on the principle that your God has integrity. God has character, good character. He doesn't lie. And especially when you pit that against the idea of Zeus, a swindler, a cheat, a whatever. Like this is the God of Jesus Christ is a God who can be trusted, is a God who keeps his promises. And based on the character of God, now we are going to think, how can we be the sorts of people to lead in this moment? He then goes on to list a number of qualities that Titus should be looking for. And I'm just going to read this whole long thing and then kind of go back and summarize it. So there's a lot here, so don't worry about getting too caught up on any of it. But the reason I left you in Crete, he says, was so that you might put in order what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. Elders were leaders in the church, pastors or growth group leaders. An elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe and are not open to the charge of being wild and disobedient. And since an overseer, that is a leader, manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. So Paul lists all these qualifications for godly leadership: blameless, faithful to spouse, self-controlled, upright, hospitable, disciplined, holding on to Jesus. Not a single one of those has anything to do with how outgoing they are, with how persuasive their speech is, with how much money they have, with how good looking they are. Many of the things that we set as the baseline for what makes a good leader. Are they eloquent? He's not interested in any of those things. What are they like, Paul is asking, when no one's watching? That's who you're looking for. The thing that only God can see, their heart. And this matters because a lot of times in our world today, we see the effects of charisma outpacing character. Charisma places emphasis on who you are when people are watching, but character on who you are when no one is watching. Charisma depends on people's response to you. The character is unconcerned with popularity. Charisma elevates how you present yourself, but character reveals how you handle yourself. Charisma is magnetic in the spotlight. We can all think of people like this. Character is resilient in the shadows when no one will know. Charisma can impress from a distance. Character is proven up close. Charisma leads with talent. Character leads with trust. And we can see these differences in the kinds of people that we tend to, in society and even in the church, appoint as our leaders. The people we're looking for often, we are concerned first and foremost with, are they charismatic? Do they come across well? And the trap of trusting in charisma, and there is a trap, is that charisma will only take you so far. So just to be really honest for a sec, everything up till now has been sort of honest, but this is going to be really honest what I say now. That was a joke, y'all. All right. Thank you for the courtesy laugh. Please laugh. But this is like a real thing for me. Like, I really struggle with this. I think most people who find themselves in places like this with microphones around their ears, people who have large platforms, people who have large followings on social media, whatever, people who find themselves in leadership positions in corporations, or it can be a struggle to not depend on charisma. And not like to say that like, it's a real struggle for me to not have a secret network of dog fighting rings. Like, not like that kind of broken character, or like to have a second family in Vermont or embezzle money. No, it's like trusting in charisma over character is like knowing that I'm probably gonna land on my feet without doing the work. Or thinking that I'll have something to offer even if I do not spend the time in private with the Lord, forming the kind of heart that has something substantial to offer. Now, this is something that maybe a person like me struggles with, and maybe there's a half a dozen or 40 of you in here that are like, oh, actually, that's kind of my thing too. But all of us have something that we can lead with ahead of character. It can be our knowledge and our expertise. It can be our people skills. It can be a prestigious family that we came from, or a prestigious university. It can be the fact that we have a lot of money, and that's a very powerful thing. There are many things that you and I can lean on in the absence of character or in the place of character. And listen, as is true with charisma and with having money and with coming from a good, well-respected family and so on and so forth, as is true with all those things aren't bad. Charisma isn't bad. It's just not a substitute for character. And the reason is because charisma, leaning on any of these things, is not just inauthentic in the sense that it's not coming from who we really are on the inside. I believe it's a time bomb. And that's usually what these big scandals that we see are. The time bomb finally going off. Charisma is good enough as long as things are going well. As long as life is working out pretty well, as long as I've got enough money, as long as I'm relationally satisfied, as long as I'm relatively happy. I enjoy my job, my home life is restful. But every one of us is going to reach a point where things are not going to go well, where we're going to start to feel pinched and pressed. And who we really are in those moments will eventually come out. If you took like a lime and you painted it with orange paint, and then you put it in a bowl with oranges, and you called it an orange, eventually someone's going to grab that orange and squeeze it. And what is not going to come out? Orange juice, right? Who we really are will come out when we're squeezed. And every one of us in life is going to experience some form of breakdown, pressure, the world coming apart at the seams, some relationship that I was trusting in, suddenly the rug being ripped out from underneath me, a job that I had my full prospects and future in that I was imagining going the distance, and suddenly they're downsizing and I'm going, like all these things will happen. You will get squeezed, and who you are in that moment, no matter how much you have put on a facade and dressed up as an orange, who we really are in that moment will be revealed. We just sang about this, but let me tell you where this came from. Matthew chapter 7, Jesus is finishing the Sermon on the Mount, which is his masterclass on how to be a disciple. And he says at the end of it, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain came, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Meanwhile, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like someone who builds their house on the sand, a foolish man. And the rain came down, and the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. Rain came, wind blew, but what? My house was built on you. The question, I love the realism of Jesus. Jesus is not ever saying, some of you might have hard things happen. He's like, and then one day rains will come and wind will blow. Like this is just a natural thing. And those of us who've been around for long enough are like, yep, amen, that's true. That's what life is like. So when this happens, what my life is built upon, what is true about me in the center, whatever metaphor is most helpful for you, these things will be revealed. And that, friends, is what our character is. Whether or not we have, up to that point, built the foundation internally so that we can weather storms, so that we can stay grounded, or whether we get swept away with the rest. The Jewish psychologist and pioneer thinker of something called family systems theory, one of my favorite thinkers and one of the best book on leadership I've ever read. It's called A Failure of Nerve. And Friedman didn't even finish it. He died before it was completed, and his children just put out the manuscript. So it just ends sort of suddenly because he had more to say. But what he says in just those few hundred pages is so incredibly profound for this moment that we are living in, because he rightly diagnoses that we are living, all of us today, in what he calls a chronically anxious society. Which is to say that the machine that all of us find ourselves in is one that is designed, engineered perfectly to stir up anxiety and division, separation. And the reason why, just to be really clear, the reason why, because nothing exists for just for its sake. The reason why you and I live in a chronically anxious system that is self-replicating is because it sells advertising. So we find ourselves as essentially pawns in a society that is constantly telling you, be outraged, that person's your enemy, don't trust them, you can't listen to them. And in this space, which just churns and whips us all around, he says, how do we now live as leaders in this moment? And this has nothing to do with what your job title is, or whether or not you ever will coach a professional athlete, or lead a troop of soldiers. This is about what kind of person, what kind of influence, what kind of wake are you going to leave behind you? And this is one of the ways he describes the function of a leader early on, and I love this so much. The function of a leader within any institution, family, church, business, within any institution is to provide regulation through his or her non-anxious, self-defined presence. I love that so much because he's describing what leadership is. Leadership is not just like what you do or what you say. It is who you are and your ability to weather a storm, your ability to withstand being squeezed, or when you are squeezed, have something good come out. Like these things come from what? They come from who you are, who we are, friends. Who I am in the shadows, who I am when no one's watching, what kind of character I've built and fed and led myself into in cooperation with God. He says regulation because our job, maybe more than ever, is to be a calming presence, a non-anxious presence, a rooted, sober presence in the midst of a lot of craziness. And self-defined, meaning that you and I know, this is a much longer talk, but we know kind of where we end and the other person begins. It's important to have that sense of like, this is where I end and where you begin, because otherwise we're gonna spend our life constantly taking on other people's anxiety, other people's franticness, whatever it is. It's like, no, I know where I am, and therefore I can be a leader. I can be a calming presence. I can be a regulating presence. I can be the kind of person who helps my friend, my child, my neighbor, my coworker, my grow group leader, whatever, through whatever we're going through. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we become people with strong character? So in another letter that Paul wrote, Romans, he writes towards the end of the letter. This is in chapter 12, so deep in the letter. He says, do not conform to the patterns of this world. So we talked about, we're changing the pattern. That's the name of our series. Like if you want to find awful examples of leadership, just look around, Do not be conformed to the pattern, like change the pattern. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Remember what Andy said early on? What is character? The will to do what is right as defined by God, regardless of the personal cost. How do I become that kind of person? Paul tells us, be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that we are able to test and approve what God's will is. Which is to ask this question as we go in for a close. Paul says that character begins with the renewing of our mind. So the question for us, maybe as a starting point, is like, what do you tend to think about? What's on your mind a lot? Archbishop William Temple, an old Anglican archbishop, said, your religion, your real religion, is what you do with your solitude. What do you do with your solitude? I know what I think I do with my solitude or what I wish I do with my solitude, but every Sunday at 9:30 a.m., Apple sends me a screen time report from the previous week, and it tells me what I actually did with my solitude. I hate that report. Does anyone get their screen time report and be like, score, yeah, that was great. What do you think about? What's on your heart? What do you do in your solitude? So how do we then move towards good character? Two things, first steps and then next steps. First step, we have to start with the you are here. If you are under the age of 30 and we used to have these big things, they're called malls, and they had a whole bunch of stores and they were in one building. And it was indoors, it was incredible. There was a really big one in Minneapolis. Anyway, back then, if you went into a mall, you'd always try to find the mall directory. And what's the first thing you look for in the mall directory? You are here, right? Why? Because nothing else matters until you know where you are. It doesn't matter, like, oh, Macy's is over there. No one cares. Where is there? Like, where am I? That's what matters. And so when we talk about character, the first step is just to simply ask, where am I? Or maybe asked a different way, who am I becoming? If I were to continue the behaviors and patterns and actions, if I were to continue to listen to the people I listen to and read the things I read and hang out with the people I hang out with, if I were to sort of chart a line from where I am today to 5 years in the future, but nothing changes between now and then about how I am, what I do, who will I be at that point? And that can be a really difficult and maybe even sobering thought. Maybe it's something like, I don't even know how to begin thinking that. Well, find someone that you really, really trust who's a safe person and ask them for help. I know that's incredibly scary, but maybe ask like your best friend. Maybe ask your spouse, who do you think I'm becoming? You've seen my trajectory for a while. Where am I heading? Am I becoming a gentler person? A kinder person? A more forgiving person? Am I becoming a more critical person? A more judgmental person? Where am I going? And then after you have some sense of where you are, that's when we begin to do the work of feeding the parts of our heart, our mind, that will grow into the kinds of leaders that God calls us to be, to have the kind of influence that you and I are made for. There's a couple of really simple next steps for us here at Prairie Heights. One is, if you're not sure where to begin with this whole idea of renewing your mind or what to think about, we're doing a summer reading plan. We're just going to read through the book of Titus together, and you can scan the QR code in the back of your chair, and you can sign up for that. And it's one way for you to just jump in and be like, I'm going to devote a little bit of time every day to trying to focus on something really good. Or if you're looking for ways to sort of lean into leadership, there's always opportunities in the church. There's going to be training all summer long for our Grow Group leaders who will be leading in the fall. And this is meant to make us into the kinds of people who are able to steer and facilitate conversations with people who are new to faith or have mature faith or are outside of faith. How do we move towards God with one another? And of course, there's always ways that you can give back here, serving in kids, serving in tech, serving on the band, serving in youth ministry. I will tell you, influencers, my life was radically changed by people like you volunteering in youth ministry. Just being there, not being profound. All of us in here have an immense opportunity as people in God's kingdom, all of us, to leave a wake behind us, the wake that we would long to leave behind us. And so let's pray. Jesus, we ask that you would help us as we study this book, as we maybe enjoy a slightly slower pace over the next couple of months, that we would take advantage of that and not lose sight of the opportunity we have to be renewing our minds, to be becoming the kinds of people, Lord, that the world, that our communities, that this church, that our families so desperately needs. God, I pray that you would help give each of us in this moment even like a picture in front of us of a person in our life, maybe a child, maybe a close friend, a colleague, a neighbor, somebody who really needs us to be the kind of grounded, non-anxious presence in their life. Help us, Lord, to see that before us and to follow you into becoming the kinds of people who are able to lead, trusting not in our charisma and our skills and our knowledge, but trusting in you and who you are making us. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.